I guess I knew at some point we would be back here again, but I must admit I didn't really expect it to be yet another Dragon Empire deck. So without further ado, let's get into our next topic, Shojodoji. It's time to learn about the deck, what makes it strong, and how you can beat it. Shojodoji is a Vanguard that was initially introduced in set 8. On release there wasn't too much to him, and it seemed like he'd go down as just another weak boss unit. However, as the deck got more and more support, it quickly became apparent that Shojodoji was a deck that would have amazing rearguards, but would be held back by having a weak Vanguard. Well, with the advent of DZ Set 3, Shojodoji would get a new form, more powerful than the last, and all the amazing rearguards would finally be able to show their maximum potential. As always, we'll start with the ride line. Riding the Grade 1 Shojodoji lets you check the top 5 cards of the deck and choose 2 stealth units, with one getting bound and the other going to soul. Riding the Grade 2 does the same thing, except the unit is called instead of being bound. This ride line allows the deck to filter 4 cards before even riding to Grade 3, and sets up both the bind zone and the soul with cards that will be necessary for the Grade 3 turns. Now of course the main star of the show is the brand new Shojodoji. Aside from being regarded as the original Shojodoji, he can EB3 and bind 3 stealth cards from the soul in order to select 2 of the opponent's rearguard circles and bind all the units on those circles, as well as a single card from the opponent's hand, with them all returning to the hand during the end phase. Furthermore, when this Shojodoji attacks, he can suck up 2 stealth units in order to call 2 more stealth units from the bind zone to both a front row and back row rearguard circle. This skill can also be used when Shojodoji gets attacked, but it's pretty unlikely that you'll ever see it used very often unless you use a deck that has access to Sentinel Restrict. Getting into the main deck, the most important piece is probably Tsukuyodachi. If he gets put into soul from deck or rear, he binds himself and soul charges 1. More importantly, when 2 or more of your rearguards get put into the soul at the same time, you can counterblast 1 to call him to an open rearguard circle. This card serves as the deck's main ways to extend their attacks past the first 4, since paying the cost to multi-attack with Shojodoji fulfills this card's condition, allowing you to call it out during the battle phase. Calling with Tsukuyodachi is Kinran. At the end of the battle that he boosts, he can put himself and another stealth in his column into the soul in order to add back a grade 2 or greater from the drop zone to the hand. Aside from this recursion, this also is another way to activate Tsukuyodachi during the battle phase. This card is the other key piece of Shojodoji's multi-attack. The combination of Tsukuyodachi and Kinran is how Shojodoji gets its maximum of 7 attacks. Aside from that, the remaining cards of the deck serve different utilities. We see the return of Izasao from the last How to Beat, serving essentially the same purpose, but this time he can actually be used to remove cards from the opponent's bind zone. We also have a new card in the form of Okijishi, who adds some additional soul setup, power gain, and makes Shojodoji's removal more permanent. Kagechiko also adds a bit of drop recursion by setting up the soul and even drawing a card. Kunai serves as a way of countercharging for the deck, but it is a hard once per turn. Unprecedented is the deck's best attacker and also nets you some advantage. So putting this all together, we can see that in reality, Shojodoji is a combo deck. However, while it may have a reliance on gathering pieces, it stands out with the fact that the pieces don't need to be assembled in the hand. Both the soul and bind zone serve as places to gather the pieces required, and adding that to the plethora of ways to search and assemble said pieces makes the deck both strong and consistent. Naturally, being a Dragon Empire deck, it also has access to board control, albeit a bit contrived, and hand ripping. Beating Shojodoji may seem like a daunting task at first, but with careful analysis it becomes apparent that there are actually quite a few chinks in the armor. Seeing as the Vanguard doesn't actually require CB, it might not be immediately apparent that the deck does require CB to function. However, CB usage in Shojodoji serves 3 specific uses: deck filtering with Izasao, multi-attack with Tsukuyodachi, and power gain / removal with Okijishi. Without CB, there is no searching, and more importantly, no attacks past the first 4. There is an argument to be made that the deck does have access to countercharge in the form of kunai. However, kunai is restricted to just once per turn since only 1 kunai can be used. In any case, CB is required to reach the upper echelons of attack potential, as each attack past the first 4 costs an extra counterblast with Tsukuyodachi, depending on how much they use for other effects in the previous turn, or whether they use kunai or not, can really eat away at their resources and prevent them from doing their full combo. That being said, CB denial may not always be the correct play. You will need to win the game at some point, and you can't just swing at rears every single turn. You need to be aware of how your deck plays and decide if CB denial is the correct play. Ironically, Shojodoji is a deck that is actually very vulnerable to retire. It may not seem like that at first with all the superior calling the deck does, but realistically the deck doesn't really make much hard advantage. Grade 2 Shojodoji, Izasao, and Impress Zen are the only cards that actually provide true advantage. In order to use Shojodoji's multi-attack, they need to build a board first, and the only real way to do that is to call cards from hand or use the grade 1 and 2 Shojodoji from bind zone. Additionally, putting their units into the drop zone is the best way to keep them from accessing them. The deck can technically recur cards with Kagechika and Kinran, but it requires a second step in the case of Kagechika, or happens during the battle phase in the case of Kinran. Realistically, there are two big things that you need to keep track of while facing off against Shojodoji: their board and their bind zone. The bind zone telegraphs what the Shojodoji player can call during the battle phase. Look out for Unprecedents and Tsukiyodashi, as they represent the strongest attacks and multi-attack respectively. The board is the other thing to check. Izasao on board can mean losing a card from your bind zone, and kunais represent potential countercharge. However, the most important thing to look out for is Kinrans. The deck needs a Kinran on the board and or one in the bind zone in order to achieve their 7 attack combo. As with all decks, you can potentially add certain cards in order to help your deck overcome the matchup. Unfortunately, a lot of my typical go-to answers aren't viable into this matchup. Neither counter attack nor counter crit heals will do anything to help you against Shoujo. Potentially counter grade heals can offer some assistance, as going second against Shoujo is probably your worst case scenario, and they may offer a small reprieve. If there is one thing to keep in mind when building your deck, it's that you should try to include cards that net you advantage. Keep in mind that Shojodoji will be removing 2 of your rears and 1 card from your hand, which are unlikely to ever make it back to your hand. Losing that much advantage takes a toll on any deck, so it'd be good to have some cards that can recur resources. Playing draw triggers this format may be a good idea, as they will also help mitigate this problem. Aside from that, there aren't too many cards that can directly counter the Shojodoji deck. One notable card is Surekill Seed Machine Gun, which will increase your Vanguard's base power each time Shojodoji multi-attacks. Of course, you'll only be able to use it if you play a Stoicheia deck, and one that doesn't require too much CB. Shout out to my boy Magnolia for being a deck that doesn't use much CB, and can even recycle the card each turn. Oh, and I suppose I could also mention that if you happen to be playing Dragon Empire, and you really hate Shojodoji, you could run these fellas to help you fuck with them. Going into the Shojodoji matchup presents you with 2 options: either rush the deck hard, or play for the long game. As we've discussed, the deck isn't exactly the most efficient at maintaining resources, so quick attacks or drawn out games sees the deck losing steam. Shojodoji isn't exactly the most broken deck we've seen in Standard, but the combination of a strong Vanguard and strong rearguards creates a deck that is unarguably one of the strongest decks in the meta. Despite this, there still remain various chinks in the armor that can give you an advantage. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to do all these YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.